Hello everybody. They say those who help students decode the world have the best insights on how the world is changing and how nations can be impacted by that. We have a very special guest with us, Professor Larry Kramer, the President and the Vice Chancellor of the prestigious London School of Economics. Professor Kramer, always a delight to interview academics, and thank you so much for being on NDTV.
No, thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be here.
So my first question to you, you have visited India multiple times. This is probably your second or third visit, but the first after COVID-19.
Yes.
Tell us, from what you've read, observed, imbibed, what is it about India that stands out for you?
I mean, what's most interesting, I was last here, I think it was 2018 or so, is how much the country has changed in just that short period of time. So, you know, there's a kind of energy here that I experienced before, and it's still here, and you see it playing out in just the incredible changes, the economic growth, the new buildings, I went to a museum that was unbelievably interesting. There's just so much happening here that's fantastically interesting. So it's that, and then, you know, it's combined with ambition. I mean, all the people I've talked to and sort of the goals and ideas and objectives that they have are really pretty fantastic.
Right. Professor Kramer, I was looking at some of your interviews. You've tried to make yourself very accessible, and I found that very interesting. You head one of the most prestigious institutions in the world. India has had a special relationship with LSE. You've acknowledged the voices of people like B.R. Ambedkar, also Amartya Sen, and most recently Dr. N.K. Singh, yes, who has headed our Finance Commission, yes, which means that there is an acknowledgement of talent that comes from India. How are you looking at scaling up this partnership, these linkages between UK and India when it comes to education?
Yeah. You know, one of my predecessors, Ralph Dahrendorf, wrote a history of LSE in which he described the relationship with India as a story of soulmates, which I always loved. And because the relationship with India actually goes back to the very beginning of the school. In 1912, the Tata Foundation, the Tata Trust, helped launch the first, one of the first social programs. It's now the department at the school, and so we've had these steady connections all along. And you know, it's partly because, well, the Indian students are so strong, and they bring so much into the community. So, you know, at this point, what we're interested in doing is building on the relationships that we have and strengthening them. So part of the reason I'm here is to make sure that, you know, people understand what LSE is and what it's about. We want more students. We want to develop faculty partnerships and research fellowship partnerships and fellowships, and just build all of those ties. And, you know, it's partly because there's so much happening here that's of interest. And as I say, it's partly because the Indian students and faculty, by the way, we have quite a few faculty also from India, bring so much into our school. And then, you know, if they come to LSE, the students, and we can educate them, they can bring that back here. So we're sort of an exporter of education. And for all those reasons, it's just an important partnership for us.
Absolutely. Professor Kramer, also, you know, last few months we saw this wave of student protests across the US and also in UK. You know, you're from the US, but you work in UK, so you understand sensibilities. But tell us, was that a challenging time for you as somebody who heads LSE? How did you sort of address that situation?
Yeah. Well, it was challenging. It was challenging for everybody, but not because there were protests. I mean, protests, we support protests. It's not that we encourage it, but it's part of free speech, right? Free speech isn't just about sort of rational discussion, although it is that. But, you know, protest is a perfectly legitimate form of expressing ideas. The challenge came from the fact that the issues that provoked the challenges were so emotional for so many people on both sides of the issue. And so you had demands to do things that were inconsistent with what you think of, or what I think of, as the obligations of free speech. So free speech means allowing protest, as long as it, you know, doesn't become illegal, as long as it doesn't harass or bully or intimidate individuals, and as long as it doesn't overly disrupt the other business of the school, because in addition to the protesters, we have other students and faculty who have their own things that they want to do. And so managing those tensions was challenging, although I think, you know, I think we got through it about as well as one could.
Right. Professor Kramer, we also know that a lot of Indian students opt for courses in UK. LSE, of course, is one of the top choices. I also think that I'm hearing a lot of voices from Indian students abroad, be it about, you know, the research papers aside, you know, be it about, you know, allegations of Islamophobia or Hinduphobia or the protests about Gaza. Is it a nice thing that there is more diversity, you know, on campuses now? Are students finding their voice, and how do you find a balance between ensuring that studies go on as usual, at the same time there's no sort of you know, oppression or suppression of freedom of speech?
So, you know, it's really interesting. Diversity is not new, certainly not to LSE. The campus and the student body and the faculty have been incredibly international for almost the whole time that the school has existed. If there's anything that's changed, it is that for some reason, and it's not just at LSE, I think this is, and not just in the UK, I think this is global. People on all sides of almost any issue just seem to find it harder to talk to each other and seem to get angrier about their differences. And so that often, leads to misunderstandings. It leads to people saying things that are in fact offensive, whether intended or not, and it becomes part of what you have to manage within a framework of free speech. Our view is, within the domain of lawful speech, there are going to be things that are said and things that are, allowed that in fact are offensive to other people, but that the way to manage that isn't to try and suppress the speech, but to try and build a culture in which people are more aware of what they might be saying and how it might be hurtful to somebody else. And on the other side, where if somebody does that, you're more resilient to hearing it and can engage more effectively with it. So that's the challenge for universities today, I think, to build a culture in which we can have a robust free speech, but manage the inevitable hurts that can come from that.
Oh, that's quite a challenge. Professor Kramer, I was looking at your interviews and I found this excellent answer in which, there's a student asking you, what is that one course that you took in your university that changed the direction of your life? And you said that you entered, the university to become a doctor, but then you took this course on religious ethics and that changed.
My mother never forgave me.
She wanted you to be a doctor?
She wanted me to be a doctor.
Okay, but you went into humanities because you found the answers that you were seeking. But tell me something, in India, religion and identity are very important, but we are also one of the oldest democracies in the world. We have a constitution for the last 75 years and we take a lot of pride in that. It makes us equal, law is equal for everybody, but we also have a civilization that goes back several years. So faith and identity are a very important part of who we are. How do you see the balance between taking pride in the constitution and also, faith, identity? Do you see a dichotomy there, or do you see this as manageable?
So I think first the tensions obviously are inevitable. They're as old as religion, and they're as old as people have had different religions. I'm an American. I was brought up on the American Constitution and the First Amendment, and there's a reason it's the First Amendment, and there's a reason that in the First Amendment, the command is to separate church and state. And that was from experience. I mean, the European experience was 600 years of Catholics and Protestants killing each other simply because they were Catholics and Protestants. And the United States was a country in which there were people of both religions as well as others. And they decided that the only way we're going to be able to manage these things is if we separate church from state. Right. So everybody should have the freedom to fully practice their own religion, and nobody should have the ability to use the state to either advance their religion or subordinate other religions. And it can be a hard line to draw, but it's one you have to maintain. And if you can do that, I think it's possible to manage the tensions, because it creates just enough space for tolerance of the fact that there are people with different religious beliefs who are practicing them, and that's okay too.
Right, and do you think these changes are also reflecting the way, UK has seen a change in demography, or for that matter, US, and the politics around that? How do you see that changing in the years to come? I
think it's honestly part of the point I was making earlier, which is that's not the change, right? There's always been that kind of diversity. It may be a slightly different mix, but what seems to have changed is the ability of people to tolerate people who have differences with them, and that's not just about religion. I mean, we see it across every issue from where I sit on any given week, whether it's politics or religion or race or gender. I'll have people sort of demanding that we punish this person or suppress that person. And the key is, as I say, to try and resist that, because that kind of approach only makes things worse. It inflames matters more, while trying to build a culture then in which people are more open to the kind of tolerance that's necessary if you're going to have a diverse society. Yeah, that's exactly what an answer should look like. And tell me, Professor Kramer, I've also looked at this whole issue of employability. There are several education institutions in India. There's also privatization of education that's taking place. What is your advice to the higher education institutes in India? Because jobs are a big issue in India. People want their children to be employable, but education is not just about skills. It's not just about employability. It's also about knowing the world. How do you make educational institutes equipped with a kind of talent so that they can train their students to get jobs in future, so that they get jobs that also pay them well? You know, what's interesting, I actually, the finance minister very kindly met with me the other day, and she talked to me about two things that India is doing, both of which are incredibly ambitious. One of them is the goal of having 8% growth, which is incredibly ambitious, and it'll be interesting to see how India achieves that, although it seems to be doing so. And then the other is the goal to have something like 50% of the people in the country get higher education, which in a country of this size is an immensely ambitious goal. Those are related though, right? Because one thing we know is that higher education fuels economic growth. The key then is while expanding the education, to also keep it diverse to the different kinds of things that students are going to do. So there's not a one-size-fits-all higher education model, because you need to be preparing people for different kinds of careers, including vocational careers, right? That's a form of higher education that is every bit as important and every bit as good as, the kind of more traditional liberal arts education to professional education. So the first piece of advice is to make sure that your higher education retains the kind of diversity and conveys the value of all of the different kinds of education. Then the second, I think implicit in your question, of course, is you have to be prepared to embrace all the changes that are happening. So the emergence of AI is obviously going to change the way we teach people. It's also going to change the jobs that we're preparing them for. So you have to understand what is it that they're going to be expected to do when they get out there, and then how do we have to change what we do to prepare them for that, which is itself a separate question from, and how do we teach them now? Because we're not only are we not going to prevent them from using these tools, we shouldn't. We should want them to use these tools. So if I have a student and I want that student to use, say, artificial intelligence models for all that they're worth, now I have to step back and ask, so how do I teach them? What do I have to teach them? What is it that I need to teach them? One of the things that I learned in my conversations this week, I also met with a lot of Indian employers of our graduates to get a sense, what should we be doing, was as the new technologies emerge, they have less need for the kind of technical education that we have been providing in the past, and more needs for interpersonal skills, and in particular things like critical thinking, problem solving, learning to learn, collaboration, and communication. So you have to teach those skills which are going to apply no matter what the jobs look like as part of the education, even as you're teaching them within different fields. So it's kind of being aware of all of those. It's a big challenge, trying to get all those things balanced into an education.
Right, and how do you see the role of tech and AI in this? Do you also see them as disruptors, and do you see them as equalizers? Because in a society like ours, we see a lot of inequality. People don't have the same kind of resources. Do you see tech as being an equalizer? India has done really well in terms of digital payments, financial inclusion. Do you see tech aiding India's efforts to sort of bridge that inequality that exists amongst its people?
I think the digital transformation here is actually really remarkable. When I was at Hewlett, we were studying what was going on with the digital IDs and all of that, and India was so far ahead of everybody else. It was kind of remarkable to watch. I think technology is obviously a disruptor, but whether it's an equalizer or not, or whether it's a good disruptor or not, is not inherent in the technology. It's completely dependent on how we use it. So that's a matter of government policy. I mean, with respect to AI, the question isn't whether we should regulate it. We are regulating it. Whether we not regulating is a form of regulation, right? It's a choice that we make on what to do with it. So I think the problem is it's evolving so fast, it's potentially so transformative, that it's really hard to know exactly what to do with it. So I think the key is to figure out how to take actions that seem to make sense in the moment while remaining nimble and flexible to changing them if that turns out not to be the right thing to do.
Yes, that's, so be mindful of what really the challenges are. Also, Professor Kramer, talk to us a little about the digital transformation that India is witnessing. What is your understanding of it? Is it also something that can be a role model or an example for other developing countries?
I think it already is an example for other developed countries, right? I mean, it's, as I say, some of the steps that have been taken in this country, at least so far as I know and understand them, are, they lay an incredibly strong foundation then for doing other things, which is one of the best things technology can do. So yeah, I would say, again, everybody's grappling with these things. What's required, which I do see here, is ambition, willingness to take risks, willingness to push forward on it, and then willingness to, deal with the inevitable disruptions that it's going to cause.
That's right. My last question to you, sir. Professor, you've also written extensively on terrorism and geopolitics. Tell us, how do you see the world changing in probably the next 1 year? I know this is a difficult question, but, with Donald Trump firmly ensconced in White House, he's been talking about tariffs. UK and France are also sort of putting up this coalition against, of course, what is happening in Ukraine. One ceasefire working out, one ceasefire threatening to, to fail. Where do you see India in all of this? Do you see India playing an important role?
I think it'll be up to India, but it has the capacity and opportunity to do so. So, of course, to think about change in 1 year, I think doesn't make sense in a time like this. There are periodic, you'll have a long period of kind of stability around an accepted order that then gets disrupted, and then you have a period of real chaos and disruption, and then it settles into some new kind of order. We're clearly in one of those periods of disruption. Any way you look at the withdrawal of the U.S. from so many of the multinational and global institutions that settled the last order is going to be a major contributor to disruption, although it was happening before this. So it creates a vacuum. Into the vacuum, there's opportunities because somebody's going to have to step up and exercise some leadership. And I think India is actually incredibly well positioned to do so. I mean, in the sense that you have the United States, you have China, you have Russia, you have Europe. India sits in the interesting place of being kind of friends with all, right, allied with none exactly, and so it has really the opportunity to, and given the size of the population, the kind of growth that's being experienced, which is just beginning, I think, as I say, there's just an opportunity to help influence and structure a new order that would be significantly better, and that India could play a leadership role in.
Right. Thank you, Professor Larry Kramer, for joining us on NDTV. That was the President and also the Vice Chancellor of the prestigious London School of Economics on his insight on how the world is changing and what kind of a role that India can play in the larger question of geopolitics. Thank you for watching NDTV.